Have you ever pursued your dream only to find yourself getting in your own way? I have. Today, 6 major mistakes I've made while pursuing my dreams on Equal Matters. My name is Rob Hunter. That intro made by Cal, the Guitar Hero, the Color 8, a band which we talked to a couple of weeks ago here on Equal Matters. One of my favorite episodes I've ever done. You get clips of their live performance. Go check it out, because it's not just a live performance, it's the interview with all 4 members of the band. So what we're doing today is reflecting back, because last week we did 8 things that I've learned from chasing the dream, and those are the positive things, those are the good things, the things that you write books about. But what often people don't talk about is the mistakes they made along the way, because sometimes you get tunnel vision. Sometimes you get myopic and you start to think of only yourself. So we're going to walk through some of those mistakes today in hopes that maybe you can avoid making some of the same mistakes that I did. So we'll start with number 1, not taking enough time off. And I bring this up because the current situation is different. So I'm changing careers. For 23 years, I've been in talk radio. And I've loved it. It is the only thing I've ever wanted to do since I got my first radio job. But having reached the top, number 1 rated show, Russell and Hunter, with my big brother Mike Russell, I didn't feel that I had anything else left to accomplish. And my goals and my dreams started to shift and get bigger and bigger and bigger. And I'm currently on a month-long journey through Europe. I spent 2 weeks in Italy. This week, as I record this, I'm in Paris, France. I've never been to Paris. Absolutely amazingly, stunningly beautiful city. This is a city I didn't want to like, but am liking quickly. So I tell you that I'm taking a month to transition between careers because I value the time off. Because I so loved my career and loved what I did, I needed a break. So fortunately, my wife is insanely good at using credit card points. So we were able to book most of the flights and the hotels and the stays based on credit card points. And then we're spending the money while we're here, which we saved up for. This time off is incredibly valuable for me because there's one factor in everyone's life, yours, mine, and everyone you know, that is equal. That is time. There are 24 hours in a day. So the question is, how do you use yours? Are you using it to your maximum benefit? Are you using it for your maximum benefit? As in, is it beneficial to you and how you want to spend your time? This month, 100% is true. But this wasn't always the case for me. Because as you probably know, when you start a career, maybe you run your own business, it's very difficult to take time off. Because if you run your own business, taking time off means no money. You're not working. You don't get paid vacations. And when I started my career, I only had 2 weeks off. My first radio job, this is typical of, I think, most industries, that first job you get, they expect you to work basically 50 weeks a year, and they throw in some holidays for you, so occasionally you get a Monday off. But see, for me in the radio industry, I didn't get a lot of those holidays off because I worked. And I worked because I was driven to. But at the same time, I missed a lot of things because I didn't value the time off. And I remember at one point in my career, the first job that I had, as I mentioned, if you've listened to the last few episodes of Equal Matters, was at a radio station called The Sky in Gainesville, Florida. And I loved this job. And my boss at the time, Andrew Lee, let me develop pretty quickly. And I'll always be grateful for that. But as I look back, I was burnt out because there were several different periods where I'd work 30 or 31 or 32 days in a row. In some capacity, I would be working for the radio station. I would be just getting it done. And in doing that, you miss a lot. So, Mrs. Hunter, my now wife, I was dating at the time. I didn't see her a lot. Her family lived nearby. I didn't see them a lot because I was making that choice to go to work to develop my skills. And if I could do it again, I would just find a better balance because I don't think it was necessary to work all of those shifts. Some of them, sure. All of them, no. So in being able to look at your time and how you want to spend it, as I can now at the age of 45 versus at 22 or 23. But there's another factor there. I was broke. I had a lot of credit card debt because I didn't really understand how money worked at the time. Got my first credit card at the age of 17, started using it, just expecting that someday after college I was going to get a good job. It was going to pay me like $50,000. I'd be able to pay off the credit card. But the problem was I didn't get that job. I got a job that paid $17,000 a year, and I needed a car when I moved to Florida, so I bought a car, and I had a car payment, had a rent payment, had to pay for food. So I was minimum payment, minimum payment, minimum payment. But I kept chipping away at it and chipping away at it because that's what I thought that the process was. That's how I understood money to work. And when you have this unrealistic expectation about what your career pay is going to be, it can be quite shocking. So that's why at least what I did is developed all those skills. But I missed several things. I missed time with my wife, I missed time with her family, and I missed my family time too. Because only having a couple of weeks off a year, well, it meant you had to pick and choose your vacations wisely. So there were 2 family vacations that I missed while I had 2 weeks off. And that was a very long time into my career before I got a 3rd week off, finally a 4th week off. Now, on my own, who knows? Maybe I'll take no time off because it all depends on me. But I value time much differently now at 45, and you can understand why. At 45, you start thinking about mortality. At 45, you start thinking that maybe you're halfway through your life, if you're lucky, because the average person lives to be what? High 70s, early 80s? So you start thinking about how many summers you have left, how many years you have left, and you look at time a little bit differently and how important what you do with your time is. Back then, I didn't care because I just wanted to work. I just wanted to gain skills because that's how I thought I was going to get ahead. So 2 vacations I missed that stand out to me. My wife, Mrs. Hunter's family, they went to California. They went to wine country one year. This was when I was living in Phoenix, so this is well after my Gainesville career, but I still at the time only had 2 weeks off, so I couldn't go. They didn't just do wine country, Napa, they also went to Yosemite National Park. And I've yet to go to Yosemite National Park. So that's one that I always look back and I always regret that I didn't go on because they had such a great time and they get to tell me all the stories and I just sat there going, man, I should have been there. Another was my family, the Hunter family. Went on a family cruise to Bermuda, left out of Boston, but again, I didn't have enough time off because it was like that delicate balance. If you could only take 2 weeks off a year, do you do it as 2 weeks? Do you do it as a week here, a week there? Do you do it as 3 days here, 4 days there, 3 days there? So you had to pick and choose. So you had to make that sacrifice. And I think that's probably common, but I've also come to realize the value in taking time off. Hence this month I'm taking off because it's allowing me to clear my head, to not be overwhelmed by work, not be overwhelmed by the amount of projects that I have to do or try to market myself or sell myself or build my business. So this month is invaluable to me because I get to do it with Mrs. Hunter. My brother is here. Mrs. Hunter's parents are here. A couple of their friends from their retirement community in Phoenix are here. My dad and stepmother joined us for a little while. And then next week, the final stop on our 1-month tour is London, England, where my mother will join us, as will one of my best friends, New York Rob, who has been on this podcast a couple of different times. New York Rob is a retired police officer. We've done 2 episodes with him. So if you really want to get insight as to what it's like to be a cop, rewind the tape, if you will. Go back and catch those episodes because Rob is completely honest and really forthcoming about what it's like to be a cop. But the mistake number 1 that I made is not taking enough time off. So if you find yourself in this situation where you don't have a lot of time off, try to get more. So later on in my career, as I started to get a little bit more notoriety and I could start negotiating because you get contracts, I always asked for more time off. And it became known that Rob is very serious about his time off. Rob doesn't leave time on the table. Because here's the reality of it. When you negotiate, so my last contract that I had at iHeartMedia was a 3-year deal with a 4th-year option. And as I was negotiating that, we were talking about money, going back and forth, and it got to the point where this is where the money was going to be. So I said, okay, I want another week off. So they gave me that 4th week off. And that provided me so much balance in my life because I work incredibly hard. I go all in. And I spend most of my waking hours working on the radio show, so you need a respite from that, a break from that, as I'm doing right now. And what I found in taking time off is not only am I grateful that I get to go see new places or just relax in my house or relax somewhere else, but I also have more time with the people that I love. I have more time to spend with them, to connect with them, because sometimes I get caught up in my world. In the past, my radio show world, where going all in required 10 or 11 or 12 hours of attention per day, which means after sleeping for 6 or 7 hours, you only have a few hours to connect with your friends and your family and your loved ones. So that's why I say that not taking enough time off was one of the major mistakes I made in chasing my dream. So the lesson is, use your time wisely, because it's the only thing we all have in common. It's the only thing where we get to determine, I'll call it the fate of our lives, what we spend our time on and what we get value out of in that time. Now, I was fortunate enough to choose a career that I liked to do, so I spent a lot of time doing it because I loved it. And now as I transition into coaching, communication, and performance, into helping my wife's business, Painted Porch Strategies, help that grow, what we do is change management, because change is very difficult. So we do it on a personal level and we do it on a business level. So I'm going to help her grow that company. And then on the health side of things, a fitness and nutrition programming company that I'm working with that I partially own is called Earn It All, because that is time worth spending, right? Time investing in yourself, either to help you change from the state of mind that you're in now or your company's state that it's in, or achieving your fitness and nutrition goals to get you on a program so you can maximize the amount of time that you have of what you can control on your end. So not taking enough time off, big mistake number one in chasing the dream. Big mistake number two is selfish decision making. I'll tell you a story. My dream job I got at the age of 25, my first talk show. So for us in this business, in the media, it's a big deal to have your name on a show. Rob Hunter Show. Fascinating. 25 years old. And how we do radio is we rate it by markets. Market size, the higher the market, the bigger the job. So, for example, New York has the most number of people that live in it in America, so New York is the number one media market in the country. LA number 2, Chicago number 3. Now, there are some people who get talk shows at the age of 25. I happen to get mine in New Orleans, which at the time was a top 50 market. So I felt really proud of myself that I was able to do that. And I made the decision in a split second. So here's kind of what happened. I applied for this job. It was just a job I saw online. I sent a CD down. Remember the CD days? And I've explained this story before on Equal Matters, but I had like a 1 in a million shot in getting this job, and I ended up getting it. But how I got it was kind of strange. So I saw that the job was in New Orleans, and I had happened to already have a trip, again, going back to the time off, going to New Orleans. New York Rob, who I mentioned, and my brother. We had booked a trip because one cruise that I did go on with my family left out of Tampa, which was great because I was living in Gainesville. This was one of the weeks of the 2 that I took off that year. And we went from Tampa down into the Grand Cayman or something like that. And then we ended up in New Orleans as that last stop. So we go to New Orleans and we had a great time. And then Rob, my brother Chris, and I decided we got to go back to New Orleans. So I had this trip booked, and I sent an email to the program director of the radio station in New Orleans. I said, hey, I'm going to be in New Orleans anyways in August. And he said, great. No matter what happens, I'll take you out to lunch. So I fly down to New Orleans, and the first night we get there, I don't go party hardy crazy because I knew I had a job interview the next day. So I go back to the hotel, I get some sleep. Rob and Chris, they stay out and do the New Orleans thing. And the best part about this was I sit down for lunch with Dan Frazier, who was the boss, and he says at the end of the lunch, he says, I'm going to call you officially tomorrow and offer you this job. And I said to him, I will officially accept the job tomorrow when you call me to officially offer me the job. But see, there was a problem with this because I didn't consult with anyone, specifically Mrs. Hunter. We were dating at that time, and we'd already lived together at that time. I was living in Boston. She was living in Florida. We were doing the long-distance thing while we were trying to figure out where my career was going to go. And that created a problem because it was, I'll call it selfish decision making. So this big mistake number 2 when you're chasing the dream is that tunnel vision, that short-sightedness that you get where you're going to make this decision regardless of the consequences. And I remember Mrs. Hunter was not pleased. Not because I got the job, not because I accepted the job, but not pleased because we didn't approach it as a team. And that was a massively important lesson to me in how relationships work. And this is just one example of how I almost blew this relationship up, how I almost ruined it. So there's a super important part of chasing the dream that you have to consider the other people in your life. The people that you love, the people that you care about, the people that you spend your time with. Again, that great equalizer. So that was a major lesson for me to learn at the age of 25, is that I was making selfish decisions, which leads into big mistake number 3 of the 6 that we have for you today in chasing the dream here on Equal Matters. Ego. So the process in accepting this job, New Orleans job, sight unseen, literally knowing no one before I moved to New Orleans, but again, I didn't care because I got this job. This was the job that I wanted. My name was going to be on a talk show, and it was going to be tons of fun. And it was tons of fun. But this is that first taste of ego that I got for real, because I started to see success, started to see myself as successful, started to go to my head, if you know what I mean. And when the ego starts to go to your head, you start to make different decisions. Because I look at it like this. I've done a lot of research on myself. I've done a lot of research on personal development, and I have a theory that you have 2 voices in your head that compete. You've got a fear-based negative voice. This was the one that used to remind me all the time that I'm not good enough. Not good enough at life, not good enough at anything, not good enough in relationships. And then there's the hype man, as I like to call it. And I use the term hype man because I am a hip-hop fan. And many hip-hop artists will have a hype man on stage to help them perform better, to help enhance the performance, to highlight certain parts of the song. And it extends beyond the stage. There are plenty of other hype men out there. The hype man voice is the voice that tells you you're the man or the woman or whatever your version of it is. That you can do no wrong. That you can make certain decisions because it pleases your ego. And the weird part about how sometimes the negative voice and the hype man interact is the hype man hypes you up to make bad decisions, which reinforce your belief that you're not good enough. At least this was the case for me. So I didn't understand this at the age of 25, 26, 27, all the way up till, I don't know, in my 30s, maybe even 40. That the ego is there reinforcing your main belief about yourself. My main belief about myself was that I was not good enough. Despite the fact that at 25, I got my first talk show in a top 50 market in the United States. But see, that's where the ego would come in. So when the negative voice would pop into my head when I was living in New Orleans and had access to Bourbon Street and bars and friends that would stay out till 3, 4 in the morning, start making different decisions. You start feeding that ego. You start listening to the hype man more, at least I did. And that hype man got me out of balance with myself. And that hype man always tended to work this way. Yeah, Rob, you the man. Look at you, 25, 26, got your own talk show. Ooh, look at you. You doubled the radio station ratings in 6 months. Well, man, you're onto something here. You're going to be in New York by the time you're 30, going back to that #1 media market. This is what my hype man would say to myself. And the hype man would tell me this, but I'm out drinking. Yeah, have another drink. It's totally fine. So you see where I'm getting at here. The hype man would lead to these bad decisions because the hype man's hyping me up in my own head. He's competing with that negative voice, almost overriding it. But then after you make those decisions, after you have that extra drink, after you go out and you party, then your negative voice comes in and goes, ooh, can't believe you did that. But see, that's the funny thing about the competing voices. That's the mistake there, is that they both work in tandem. You just don't typically realize it. I didn't realize it. Maybe you do, and maybe that's fantastic for you, but I didn't. And the reason I bring this up is because I want to be personal. I want to tell you the mistakes that I made so that you can either stop making the mistakes if you're making them, whether they're similar, whether they're exact, or you can learn not to make these mistakes. Because in understanding how my mind works, a couple of things going on. You always have a fear voice, a survival instinct. A survival instinct that kicks in at all these random times, and this survival instinct is that you're not good enough. That's the one, the fight, flight, or stand still. That's that. It's some language version of that. At least this is my theory on how survival works in our modern everyday lives. Because having just spent a week in Rome, the fear-based voice back then was a little different. In 1100, for example, it was literally more survival. Ours really isn't. Because survival back then meant, did you have enough to eat? Did you have enough to drink? Did you have shelter? We have, for the most part, all of those things. So our fear-based voice is different. And what's so fascinating to me about this is my friend Johnny B. from Hanson, Massachusetts, one of my longest, best friends, had a theory a while back. He says, we've evolved so much, it's almost as if our brains have to make up things to struggle with. That's that survival brain, that fear brain that he brought up so brilliantly. And I think we were like 19 or 20 when he brought it up. And I've been thinking about that ever since in how the fear-based voice applies to the modern life. And the fear-based voice applies to that modern life by telling you you're not good enough or whatever version of it that you have that holds you back. Because fear, right? Fight, flight, stand still. So this voice for me would have me stand still, help me not make decisions, help me not go for it. But then the hype man would have me go for it. So they're almost two opposite ends of the spectrum that compete, but it reinforces the main belief about yourself. For me, I'm not good enough. So the mistake is made in that I didn't understand this long enough. And the mistakes that you make when you let those two competing voices either help you make decisions or keep you from making decisions that are beneficial to you ends up hurting people you love. So the answer is, number one, for me, I had to understand what those two voices were doing, where they came from. And I heard this quote that I've mentioned before here on Equal Matters that changed the way I thought about this. And it was, your thoughts are not your own. And what that did for me is gave me a little bit of freedom to say that when that negative voice came in that said I'm not good enough, I didn't have to believe it anymore. I didn't have to listen to it. And then when the hype man came in, that ego that told me to go for it, do it. Yeah, no one's going to know. What that did is allow me to do the same thing. Understand that that's not necessarily me. That's not necessarily my own. That's just whatever's going on in my head trying to compete together. But I don't have to act on either. And understanding what they were allowed me to take a step back and go, oh, okay, I understand what's going on here. Because understanding for me is the key. Whether it was a concept in high school math class, whether that is a political concept that I studied during my political talk radio career, understanding for me has always been the key. So once I understood that I had these two competing voices, the negative voice, the ego hype man, I could understand how to use them to my benefit. And what do I mean by that? Because once you understand what they are, once you understand that, you can manage them. You can take control of them. You can take the steering wheel of the car of your mind and drive it where you want. But also what changed that I started to learn more and I started to develop was not just the control aspect, but how I thought about decisions. I didn't think about them like I did at the age of 25. It was always about me and only about me, and I didn't care what the consequences were because me. Ego, right? So we have mistake number 2, mistake number 3 combined together here. But what I started to look at was how these decisions that I make have ripple effects to the people that I love. Mrs. Hunter, my family, her family, my friends. And when I started to think about things not just in terms of me, I started to make better decisions. And I'll just say this frankly, my character started to develop in a better, more positive way. Because now I understand how I work. That doesn't mean I don't have to battle the negative voice that pops into my head sometimes or the ego that wants me to make different decisions, because they're both still in there. But now I understand what they are. I understand how to manage them. And for the most part, I can control them. I'm not perfect. I never will be perfect. It is a constant practice, as we say, on the painted porch when it comes to our stoicism. Because ultimately it comes down to this. The dichotomy of control. This is something the Stoics, again, we're just in ancient Rome, and there's statues and reminiscence of Marcus Aurelius. He's regarded as one of the 5 good emperors, 5 great emperors of the 105 that ruled over Rome, because he understood that he can only control him. What he thought, what he said, what he did. But it's in taking that next step and understanding what you do and what you say has impacts on other people. And if you approach from a standpoint of the people you care about the most and how this decision will impact them, it will help you make better decisions. So, mistake number 1, not taking enough time off. Mistake number 2, in chasing the dream, selfish decision making, and how that really hurts relationships. As does mistake number 3, managing your ego, your 2 competing voices that reinforce your main belief about yourself. And then there's a good one here, number 4. Number 4 mistake that I've made, the 4th mistake that I've made, is letting those emotions get the best of you. So I'm a communications expert. I have a course called Master Your Message that helps you work on all these things. How your internal voice is the most important one. How the communication with yourself is the most important thing. And if you want information on that, go to paintedporchstrategies.com/communication, because this will help you work through these processes. Because I do have a process that helped me, a tool that I created to help me understand myself, and then how to manage these voices, get control of them, and use them to my benefit and other people that I care about and I love's benefit. But this was the process I had to go through with mistake number 4, is sometimes your emotions do the talking for you. You say things you don't mean. If you're angry, I know you know what I'm talking about. You have certainly said things in anger that you want to take back. It's like you see the words come out of your mouth and you're like, oh shit. You want to catch them and reel them back in, but you can't because the damage is done. So that's why it's important to understand managing not just the voices in your head, but your emotions. So the process that I created is called the WRAP process. Recognize what's going on, assess what's going on, and then process it. Because when you process it, you understand how your anger takes a hold of you, or your depression, or your sadness, or even your happiness. You can do it for your positive emotions as well. But I'll give you another story. I think it was 2008. I got a call one night from my boss, Russ. And Russ says to me, hey man, you ready to go to St. John's, Arizona? No. I responded. I was in the middle of something. And I didn't want to go. Because it was like 7 o'clock at night. I wake up early in the morning. It's a 3-hour drive. Just didn't want to go. So I let my emotions do the talking. And I almost lost my job because of it. Now, the reason why we wanted to go to St. John's, Arizona, this was when I was producing the Daryl Ann Carlo show, was because a 10-year-old boy was being accused of murdering his father and the adult roommate that lived in the home. 10 years old. And I was like, big deal, who cares? But turns out I did go. Turns out I kept my job. And it turns out that it was really interesting to see a 10-year-old sitting in a courtroom in front of a judge with a bunch of lawyers being accused of murder. Because the legal system had never really dealt with anything like that, at least not in the state of Arizona. And I got to witness that firsthand. But I almost didn't because I let my emotions get the better of me, as sometimes is still the case. When I'm hungry, it happens. When I'm frustrated, it happens. When I'm mad, when I'm tired. I still have these triggers when I'm told what to do. I still have these triggers that let those emotions speak for me. And as I say those words, I'm like, uh-oh, can't catch them and bring them back. So then you have to do the apology tour, and then you have to learn more about yourself, and then you have to try to not do it again. So that was a big mistake number 4, is that instead of calmly asking my boss why we're going to St. John's, I got frustrated, and I snapped. And he got pissed. And he called Daryl, the host, and he says, you ready for another producer? Now, luckily, Daryl said, no, let me take care of it. And Daryl did. We had a talk, got myself right, understood what was happening. But that eventually led me to creating this process, the rap process that I just described, because I knew that my emotions, like most of us, get the better of me when I don't want them to. And then I say things that I regret. And again, it comes down to that impact you have on the people that you love. So that is that massive lesson. But I also learned something else from that. Mistake number 4 in leadership is lead with the why and communicate the benefits of why you have to go to St. John's or why you have to be part of this team or why you have to be running this project. Because that communication is incredibly important. Because as a leader, you don't want to trigger people if you can avoid it. And you can't always avoid it because people know people, as Mrs. Hunter often says, one of my favorite phrases that she says. But as a leader, explain the benefits, explain the why, explain the reasons, you get buy-in, and then there's less resistance. So that's mistake number 4, letting my emotions get the best of me. We all do it. We're humans. We're emotional beings. We're not always rational thinkers. Mistake number 5, all or nothing thinking. Now, this is a major one because I'm going to put it in terms of how I viewed success. Because success ultimately is an individual pursuit. We'll have another podcast on this coming up in the next couple of weeks. But for me, the ego came back into play at the age of 25 when I got my talk show. 25 years old, big time, Rob Hunter, look at you. Ooh-wee. Starting to feel myself. So I started to change the way that I viewed success because I didn't think, despite the fact that I got my show at 25, that I was successful. I said, nope, success is going to be measured by whether or not I get to New York City and I become a broadcaster there. So I had this goal that I was going to do it by 30, which is pretty silly because so much of that is outside of my control because oftentimes in broadcasting, it's about who you know. Oftentimes in many businesses, that's the case. And at 25, I didn't know anybody. A couple of people here or there, but no connections in New York. But that's what I wanted. So when 30 came around, 3 years after Hurricane Katrina, I was producing the Daryl and Carlo show and felt like I was not successful at all. Felt like I had let myself down because it was all or nothing thinking. That the only way to be successful, again, this is the all or nothing, the only way to be successful was to be in New York by the time you were 30. And if you weren't there by the time you were 30, oh, well, you're a failure. Again, going back to that main belief I've had about myself, you're just not good enough. And if you can't get to New York by the time you're 30, obviously that's proof. But you see how that belief reinforces a lot of the mistakes, right? Because ultimately, if I think about these mistakes, they're all built around that main belief that I had about myself. A belief that I adopted when I was 7 or 8 years old, and a belief that I kept looking at the world through. So imagine you have a belief about yourself that you establish at 7, 8, 9, 10. And you have a certain point of view when you're 7, 8, 9, or 10. And that point of view is not real deep because your brain is not real developed by that age. But somehow your brain is able to keep hold of that belief for 20 or 30 years or the rest of your life if you're not careful. Because that is another major mistake that leads to number 6, our final mistake that we're going to talk about today in chasing the dream. And that mistake is undervaluing yourself. I undervalued myself because I had that main driving belief that I wasn't good enough. And I set up these impossible barriers that I couldn't control that would determine how I viewed myself, getting to New York by the age of 30, which didn't happen. But as I started to grow and I started to understand something, that driving belief that I'm not good enough that helped make all of these mistakes possible is what helped me undervalue myself. Weirdly, I just watched a video from Jim Carrey, and Jim Carrey is such an interesting story, the actor. And one of the stories that he tells is he took out a checkbook and he wrote a check to himself and he put $10 million in it. And what he would do is he would go in his room, this is when he was a young actor, and he would meditate and he would lay there and he would just think about the $10 million and think about all the ways that he could manifest himself getting a $10 million check. And he started out as an actor, and he got part here, he got a part there, he got on In Living Color, Ace Ventura, and then came a movie called Dumb and Dumber. And Dumb and Dumber paid Jim Carrey $10 million. So what Jim Carrey says is that he had this insane belief in himself, that he could manifest what he wanted. In this case, $10 million to do a movie, which he got, which Dumb and Dumber is one of the greatest movies of all time, at least one of the greatest comedies. It's such a great movie. But he didn't undervalue himself. So he knew that eventually he would get to that $10 million mark. So it allowed him to do In Living Color and Ace Ventura and whatever other parts that he had in between there until 93, 94 comes around and Dumb and Dumber calls him up, the Farrelly brothers, and said, "We want you." And he made that movie so great, it was worth the $10 million. But it's that insane belief in yourself that no one else is going to have for you that you can. But you got to be careful with that, right? Because it goes back to the hype man and the ego. Because you still have to do the work. I watched this other video from a monk who says, it's fine to manifest and dream and think about what you want to be, but it doesn't matter unless you test it, unless you test how to get there, unless you try things, unless you take action, unless you learn from the action that you take. So for me, I didn't value myself. I didn't have those insane beliefs about myself that Jim Carrey did. I had the opposite. So because I had that belief, I constantly downplayed myself. I constantly took less money. I constantly just sucked it up or dealt with it, just saying this is my lot in life. I'm just destined to be poor. I'm destined to be broke. And how that manifested itself in terms of my profession did the same thing. I took on extra work all the time. And I get benefits now from taking on that extra work, but I didn't really stand up for myself. And when you realize, especially in the corporate world, is that very rarely is someone going to stand up for you and invest in you. You have to do it. And that is a cold, hard lesson to learn in the corporate world, in the real world, is that your belief in yourself determines how much you value yourself. You can take the Jim Carrey approach, and you can keep working at it, working at it, working at it, towards your insane belief about yourself, or you can do what I did, and you can downplay yourself, and you can talk yourself out of things, or talk yourself out of applying for a job, or talk yourself out of asking for a raise, or talk yourself out of saying, you know what, I'll just stay here because there's stability, because that's all part of it. So I want to run through these mistakes that I've made in chasing the dream, because I do think it is incredibly important to spend time doing what you want to do, because time is that great equalizer. Time is the most important factor in our lives. Now, it's true we don't always have control of it, but there are things that we can do to make sure that we have some control over our time. You can pick a profession that you like. You can pick people to hang out with that you really like, that you love. Because the more I look back at my life, 45 years in reverse, the more I think about the time that I spent and with who that ultimately matters. And I have a good friend whose father just passed away. And that just reinforces that belief that you don't know what your end date is, but there is one. So you have to make the most of the time that you get, not knowing where the end game is. So those 6 mistakes that I made, 6 big lessons that I've learned in life, is not taking enough time off. Time for myself. Time with my loved ones. Whether that's vacation, hanging out at home, whatever it is that you love. Fortunately for me, I did find a career that I liked spending time doing. That's an advantage I had, but that also took over. And that led to burnout, and that also led to some of these other mistakes. Number 2, being selfish decision-making, not thinking about the impacts, my decisions, the ripple effects that we talk about here on Equal Matters, what they had on other people, specifically Mrs. Hunter. Number 3, the ego. I told you, you got the negative voice and you got the hype man. The negative voice is there to reinforce whatever your belief is about yourself on a negative level. The hype man is kind of the opposite, but the hype man always ends up leading back to that negative voice because they work in tandem. I didn't understand that, so that was mistake number 3. Mistake number 4, letting your emotions communicate for you. In other words, letting your emotions get the best of you. I have a tool that I invented to help me It has helped me tremendously. All you need is a second or two or five to not respond, whether that be to the voice that's in your head that really wants you to tell someone off because it's going to make you feel better in that moment. But see, the problem with making yourself feel better in the moment when you do something like that is you feel worse in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, a year, 2 years. So you have to mind your gap, if you will. So mistake number 4, let those emotions get the best of you. If you want help with that too, please reach out to me, Rob at Equal Matters. Rob at Equal Matters, or find me on social media. Just type in Rob Hunter Media. You'll be able to find me. Mistake number 5, all or nothing thinking. Don't do this. I've changed my definition of success because I went all or nothing. I had to be a New York radio talk show host by 30 or I was a failure. So at 30, guess what happened? When I turned 30, I felt like a failure. I was depressed. I was bummed out until I started to work that belief about what success is. I think next week we'll talk about that, as success is an individual pursuit and how I changed that belief to accept my own success. And then number 6, maybe the most important lesson, most important mistake, undervaluing myself, reinforcing that belief that I'm not good enough, not good enough, not good enough. That led to me getting underpaid, not getting enough time off, and that led to a lot of these other mistakes as well. So I hope today that maybe you can learn something from me. I offer myself as an example in hopes that you can either alter the course of where you're at, use the tool that I gave you, the WRAP tool, or have you think about investing in yourself. One of the best things I have done in the last 6 or 7 years, invest in myself. Learn new skills. Learn about how my brain works. I spent a lot of money. Mrs. Hunter spent a lot of money. We went all in. That is money I will never regret spending because it led me to understand myself. And now that I understand myself, I understand how my voices in my head work. I can manage them. I can get control of them, as I mostly have right now as I constantly work on it. But I also understand the impacts of my decisions and how they impact the people I love the most. My name is Rob Hunter. Thank you for being here on Equal Matters. If you haven't done so yet, please rate and review us because that's how we grow. The whole point of this is to talk about things that most others do not. I mean, there's wars going on, there's political conversations going on, but most of the time it's just scratching the surface level. And the truth is, in order to change America, the world, we have to change as individuals. We have to understand ourselves and what we're in control of. Ultimately, it comes down to one thing, you. You're only in control of you. What you say, what you do, what you think. So, if you haven't subscribed yet, please click that button, whatever your preferred podcast provider is, or you can just catch up with me on social media as well. Have a good night. Cheers.